looking back at 2024, what are the hacks you missed the most in AdMon?
The dust has settled. A lot of the landscape has changed, right? Monetization as we traditionally understood it will cease to exist. First-party data will be the gold standard because it gives you the best profiling of the users.
So let's talk about that and the IDFA restrictions, throwing a wrench into all of that. How have you adapted your approach? We have to think about the genre. A mid-core game has a very different level of focus and concentration, and there will be maybe different ad formats that would work in a mid-core as opposed to a casual.
2025 and perhaps beyond that, the question, of course, is what types of first-party data can you actually ingest is actually valuable to the advertisers?
Stick around. We are just getting started. We are on a roll. Welcome back to In the Groove, the podcast where I lead the bold conversations with the leading minds in apps, marketing, AI, and today we touch upon all three because we continue with a special series powered by our partners at Verve, where we dive into the trends shaping app marketing and monetization, in this case, in gaming, because that's where it all comes together. That's where they have the pioneers of performance marketing. And so I'm very excited to have Andrew Seow, Director of Monetization at Tripledot Studios, of course, a studio recognized by the FT for stellar growth and much, much more. More recently, even expanding, including the recent acquisition of Zephyr Mobile. That may be the news, but Andrew, you for me are the news because you have been top of mind with me, almost my bucket list, since seeing you at an AdMon panel it was at Games Forum Barcelona. So I'm lucky to have you. What a great way to start off the new year.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Very, very pleased to be here and very honored to be here. I think I remember you sitting in the front row.
Right up front.
Yes, and you wanted to ask a question, and I think we must have had too good a chat with Felix on that panel because we never got to hear your question. But now...
Yeah, here we go. I did write some summaries in LinkedIn. And of course, I was so excited to have you here because I remember you were the most real on the panel. I liked you because it was like, yeah, these are the hacks I really miss. So you got me going. And I thought, yeah, let's ask you, 2025, looking back at 2024, what are the hacks you miss the most in AdMon?
I mean, the fan favorite, honestly, and the one that really captured, I think, everyone's kind of imagination for 2022, 2023, even the tail end of 2024 was, your Google waterfall refreshes, because that was the big hack that, of course, has been eliminated, right, by Google's kind of shift to bidding. I think the other one is that you have this kind of like hybrid setup. So you have both waterfalls as well as bidding in the same auction that a couple of networks offer. Your partner Verve is actually one of them who allows for this hybrid setup. And it's quite a fun way to keep, I think, the auction as dense as possible in a monetization waterfall. I think that's going to go away more and more because it is more efficient for these networks themselves to maintain one setup rather than have both. And I think it's something that you're going to miss because, I mean, that's what I started out with in monetization. I think that's what, traditional, I guess, monetization operators know, and that's their bread and butter. And so it's a very different ball game as we kind of like go into 2025 and beyond.
Maybe for our audience who doesn't quite get deep into the weeds like you do, Andrew, just step back for a moment and tell me why hybrid is better. Maybe explain what you see going forward as that becomes, for lack of a better word, more and more phased out because we move to bidding.
The way to think about the waterfall auction, just in general or as a concept, is that it is a way for demand, so all of the advertisers, to be able to access the inventory that we as a gaming publisher or just publishers in general are able to offer. And the thing is that you have different types of advertisers, whether they run through agencies, whether they run very bespoke campaigns, or they're just more traditional in the sense that they don't have that technology to interpret the bid signals. who might need something that is simpler to tell them what the quality of the inventory that they have or that they are trying to buy is. And for them, having waterfall placement, so waterfall meaning that the prices are being set by the publishers themselves as an indication of what a publisher believes the quality of their inventory is a good way for us to access those types of campaigns that might otherwise not be able to participate programmatically. A hybrid setup, I suppose, the cleanest way to think about it is that it maximizes that access. And I guess as you move towards bidding, if there are no other alternatives for these types of advertisers, these types of bespoke campaigns to participate or to reach out to publishers, then you have less access, right? You have less dense auctions, you have less competition, which I think just hurts both the price, I'm sure, but it also affects the quality because you are not going to get perhaps high quality, perhaps brand campaigns, for instance, that are willing to pay for a very short period of time, but are willing to pay very high prices in that. And that I think is the risk of moving towards bidding without accommodating for the fact that not all advertisers can participate to the same degree.
And very good point about the brands as well, because they have a different view of this. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I wanted to look at you as a person, Andrew, because that's what attracted me at the first, because when I heard you speak and heard you being, as you are now, edgy and educational, and looking at your background, I thought, wow, we know intuitively that math and data and music go together, but you brought it together in your background. I love seeing it, a passion for music based on your knowledge of music. If you look at the state of mobile gaming right now, right, and you want to compare it to a music genre, a composer, a song lyric, what would it be and why? The music lover in you has to come out now, Andrew, not just
I know
the data guy.
I'll give you two. So, one of them comes from the musicals world, which musical theater is a big kind of personal passion, hobby of mine. There is a song in the musical Groundhog Day called "Stuck," and it's this moment or scene where the main character is just being stuck in a loop and he's reliving every day and he's going to all of these witch doctors to try and get help. And I can't remember the lyric off of my head, but he's just kind of saying, all of the witch doctors are saying, look like he doesn't really have a clue we don't have a clue what we're doing. He doesn't have a clue, but he's kind of desperate. And I think the story of 2024, particularly with the Google bidding changes, particularly with still grappling with the tail end of things like IDFA deprecation and feeling that everything is perhaps being a bit squeezed, right? As you are trying to navigate all of the transitions happening quite at once. There is that sense that, we are getting a bit stuck, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of what we are living right now feels like we're living on repeat because there doesn't seem to be a way out of the transition right now, or no easy way out of the transition, I think is the better way to put it. But the second, I think, which hopefully is what drives everyone to stay in the business, drives people to kind of continue to innovate, is the Firebird Suite. So Igor Stravinsky's kind of gorgeous ballet suite. But in particular, I really enjoy the last three movements from the Firebird Suite. So it starts with the Infernal Dance, which is very kind of rhythmic and very kind of polytonic, and then it ends. I don't know if you've ever seen the Fantasia 2000 film, the Disney, where it's like this water sprite that dies or gets evaporated by the Firebird and then kind of rejuvenates and regenerates the forest. And I think that, to me, signals, I suppose, what people are hopefully banking on, right, in 2025 and beyond, that the dust has settled. A lot of the landscape has changed, right? I think monetization as we've traditionally understood it, as I kind of referenced a moment ago, will cease to exist, right? Like the bread and butter that people have done for perhaps a decade or more will no longer exist. But I think from that, hopefully, you get kind of spring eternal, right? You get new ideas, you get new innovations, you get a different landscape. And people hopefully stay because they will continue to grow and continue to build new skills in this landscape that we're now in.
I love that thought. I love that thought. It's almost like, we've been through, I wouldn't say the worst, but we've been through a lot and we come out and we're stronger and better and smarter because of it.
It's not been the easiest of years, and I think the mobile gaming industry, of course, has had its tough moments, but there's been a period of kind of strong growth, right? Like hypersonic growth in a lot of cases. And I think relative to that, right, when it's less than hypersonic, it does feel like, a bit of a course correction. But I don't think so. I think it's more that we are perhaps just adapting. And so hope, I hope, is the message that we have in 2025 and beyond.
I'm an optimist. I'm just like, we will figure it out. We will figure it out. And you have, because if I look at what you've done with the strategies, I mean, look at Tripledot. It has adapted its AdMon approach. I met so many people from Tripledot. First of all, they're all pumped and they're all positive. It all fits together and there's a strategy there. And you're a data-driven company anyway. So let's talk about that and the IDFA restrictions, throwing a wrench into all of that. How have you adapted your approach? What are the tactics, channels, whatever that has allowed you to move on and literally up your game?
Like many others in the industry, we made a massive shift in UA and consequently monetization towards the Android platform. And I think, kudos to a lot of the partners who we work with, who have managed to find ways around, IDFA deprecation, whether in terms of the way that they interpret the signals, in terms of the way that they ingest or deal with probabilistic data, right? I think they have helped iOS to kind of continue to be maintained. What we have seen, I think, maybe in the tail end of 2024 and maybe kind of 2025 and beyond is a resurgence of iOS. I'm not going to really call it a renaissance yet, right? Because I don't think we're seeing that kind of hypersonic growth that we definitely saw with a lot of the Android platform titles. But it's coming back. And I think a lot of that comes down to the innovations that networks have done, a lot of the work that they have done to build models that can get around or work within the parameters of IDFA deprecation. With the Google changes that have happened this year, and as we know, Google's kind of bread and butter there is on the Android platform. So we're perhaps seeing a bit of a rebalancing because other networks are still trying to work out how they deal with that slight kind of space that is now created with the Google changes happening. Whereas iOS has been such a focus, right? Because it was a very empty kind of space for a while. And so whoever worked out the best models and the best kind of service offering or product offering to publishers really could kind of start to dominate that space. So I think that's what we're seeing in terms of how IDFA, I guess 3 years on, has changed the landscape, but how perhaps the landscape is adjusting again with new changes that are coming and how we have responded to the previous IDFA changes that initially.
Yeah, because we have privacy sandbox coming at some point. We don't know the timeline now. It's not as clear as it used to be, but it's not going away. This is going to happen.
I mean, I don't know what the shape of the privacy sandbox is going to be. Of course, we've seen all these white papers, we've heard all these focus groups that have been done by Google, but it's difficult to know how that is actually going to play out and how that's going to roll out because it's a different beast, it's a different creature. I think Google has tried to do it very differently from how Apple kind of did it initially with IDFA.
Yes.
But I think it's still unknown, right? How we would have to adapt to those changes, both from the publisher side as well as the kind of network and the advertiser side. And as a result, what the implications for us actually are. So you're right that I think, when it lands, when it finally is out of the oven, we will have to grapple with that. But it is so unknown at the moment.
Speaking of that, since then, we've been hearing so much and seeing so much activity about first-party data. It's the new gold standard for UA, for AdMon. They're both, two sides of the same coin. you at the helm, I'd be therefore very interested in understanding how Tripledot's approaching the shift, how you have been moving in this direction, or think you still have room to move and improve in 2025.
I think you're right that like first party data will be the gold standard because it gives you
Mm.
the best profiling of the users. I think even before you think about, okay, how do we mine more data? Of course, in a privacy safe way, but how do you mine more of that data? I think the first question we always ask ourselves is, what is that going to translate into?
Mm-hmm.
If you provided, someone's entire life profile to an advertiser, right? How
Mm-hmm.
much more money does that actually make us in the context of an auction? And I
Okay.
guess the point here is that I think a lot of networks, a lot of advertisers say that they want first party data, but it's that they're not able to ingest it, right? When we
Hmm.
kind of pass it to them, either because the formatting is not correct, either that it's because it's not info that actually matters to them. And so we, of course, as the publisher, we have kind of like some data on our users, right? Quite a lot of data on our users. Whether or not that's the right type of data that is considered first party data for the purposes of advertisers is a different question. And I think 2025 and perhaps beyond that, the question, of course, is what types of first party data can you actually ingest, is actually valuable to the advertisers? And if we were to go to the effort of collecting it, storing it, making sure that it's safe, and then piping it over to networks, are we actually going to make the returns on that, right? Are we actually going to make the money on the investment taken to build and maintain all of that data infrastructure needed to support that situation? So I think even before we think about, okay, let's go down this entire first party data route and let's start kind of mining everything and collecting everything and storing everything, I think there needs to be a lot more conversations that happen with networks, which I'm sure will happen, because they are definitely very interested in it. But we need to have those conversations about how and what exactly we are choosing to collect.
That is a fascinating perspective, Andrew, because I've heard some of this before at some conferences where it's like, but what do brands want? What does it take to get brands involved? Because they're underrepresented. And part of that imbalance is perhaps, yes, what is the first party data? But yes, what is indeed the first party data? I bring up brands and advertising, and there is, as I said, an imbalance. So, how do you see this playing out across your market, but maybe also across other subgenres, not just, hybrid casual.
I think the philosophy of Tripledot is that the user experience is what is paramount to us. And so ultimately, we are going to create that great user experience. Of course, we need something to keep the lights on, and so that's coming in the form of ads. But we do believe that we are giving players a really good trade-off because the games that we make are great, and therefore like ads is a worthy enough kind of sacrifice for 10, 15 seconds, to be able to continue playing the game. Just on the topic of in-game purchases, I suppose, like in general, I guess that's always a function of what happens in the kind of real economy, because it's a subjective purchase. In many ways, people would make those purchases if they feel like they have the kind of capacity to, financial capacity to, but they are also invested enough in the game to do that. Interest rates and everything in the real economy has been dominating the stories for 2024, and that's, I don't think, going to go away, right? So you're still going to see people perhaps being more reluctant. I think it's a different story in ads, and I think one of the reasons that perhaps more and more publishers are considering kind of ads models as part of their monetizations kind of strategy, even if it's not dominant, but as part of it, is because I think it tends to be more resilient over time. Equally, we have new games coming out all the time if you think on the performance marketing side, and they are going to want to get new users. So I think it's a lot more resilient versus the kind of in-game purchases model on the market. But there are benefits to both.
So it's about the player experience, absolutely. But then the monetization experience, as you said yourself, it needs to be more kind of aligned with that. And in many cases, it's about the ad quality, frequency. There's a number of things that play into the player experience. How has Tripledot stayed on top of this? What are some of the innovations that you've seen or that you're thinking about in 2025 that literally let you balance those two? Something has to, as you said, keep the lights on. Something has to keep the players coming back and enjoying the ads.
If you think about the two kind of inputs of monetization, right? One of them is price and one of them is quantity. So as you suggest, like ad frequency is one of them, and then CPMs or price is the other input. And ad quality, I think, is very much tied to that kind of price component. You do see that advertisers are coming up with longer and longer kind of videos, more aggressive templates that mean that it's harder for users to escape the ads and get back to the game, all in service of higher price. And I think there comes a point where perhaps that will not be acceptable anymore on any level, right? Like perhaps unless you were willing to pay, I don't know, $500 CPMs or more for that kind of level of aggressiveness, publishers will not accept that anymore. And I think one of the perhaps innovations or topics that will come around is how we kind of balance ad quality versus price. So we were still just talking about price, right? But it's how do you balance between ad quality and price? And I think there's not much that we can, publishers have many levers around, but one thing for sure is experimenting and testing. I think more and more networks are becoming comfortable with the idea that they need to give publishers that ability to A/B test templates to see the impact on the user experience, on the engagement, on retention, and the uplift comparatively in CPMs or prices that they might get. Because different publishers will have different thresholds, right? Depending on the type of game that they are creating and the type of users that they are servicing, which I guess would be a wish list in a way from publishers to the networks and definitely to the advertisers. But there is also that kind of dynamism that has to come in with the A/B testing, that that there are different types of templates that come in. And so as the templates are coming in, as you kind of monitor and see the impact on retention, you have to adjust over time and to make sure that you are giving players that high quality experience that you promised them as part of that kind of contract.
The whole time I was looking into some playtest cloud data because they look at user research, player research, and really in the experience. It's like someone will play a game and then they will speak and then they will record this feedback, and some of it is pretty raw. Actually, there's like someone was playing a game for about 5 minutes and about 3 minutes of it was ads that you could not skip and could not stop. So it's just like a horrible experience. You'd think that publishers and you think that ad networks would figure that out.
At the moment, because within the context of an auction, price is king, because price is the only thing that determines whether or not you get to show the impression in the first place. If it means that advertisers are willing to pay more so that there is a higher probability of them actually being able to serve that impression, serve that ad to a user so that they can convert, then that's what networks are going to allow. So I think, in fairness to networks, right, like I think they're caught in a bit of a bind, because a lot of these networks as well increasingly are serving both kind of the UA side and the admin side. So they see both sides of the coin. And they have to, try and sell different narratives, even though it's trying to do the same thing. One of the stories or the narratives coming out from the user acquisition side in 2024 is that CPIs have definitely gone up. It's more expensive now to acquire users.
Absolutely.
And my kind of best guess on that is partially also that everyone is trying to compete for, the same kind of high quality group of high quality users. And in order to win an auction, they are going to have to pay more so that they outbid everyone else. And the only way right now that you can demonstrate that you're willing to pay more is if you are serving an ad that has cooler graphics or is more attention grabbing, that is harder to close because, or it's harder to get out of, meaning that you are more likely to tap and get sent to the store. So maybe someone will install just out of, I don't know, frustration, to get rid of the ad. And I guess this is something that, if you were to say what keeps you up at night, right? I think the question is, what can we do to get out of this circle where everyone is kind of doing the same thing and just
Going after the
following what
same
everyone else is doing?
eyeballs. Yes.
Exactly. But the question I think that publishers will have to grapple with is, to coming back to the topic of first party data, what else can you do to enrich the signal so that the price is more reflective of things other than just what advertisers want, right? Like, can price somehow reflect the quality of the user engagement, or the quality that publishers think the user is worth, and the quality or the value of the engagement, right, to the publisher as well?
It's an interesting point you raised because, yes, I agree. It will have to be more granular.
Yeah, and I think that's where the direction of it is going to go.
So we talked about CPIs. Yes, they are high. That was what everyone was talking about and complaining about in 2024. What about the dips in eCPMs? How have you thought about or seen that publishers can, mitigate those dips?
More and more networks, I think, are coming up with their bidding products, or just SDK products that mean that they are able to now participate in the auction. Definitely kind of testing more and more of these networks mean that you are going to be able to build in more competition within the auction. Because I think the story of dropping CPMs also reflects the fact that perhaps in some kind of genres or in some parts of the industry, right, like all the good users have been monetized, all the good users have been bought up, and perhaps there are not as many kind of like high quality, high LTV or high value users left to acquire, right? Which means that you are seeing a drop in CPMs. I think the other side, of course, is that if brands are not buying as much, or brands are also going to kind of pull back the spend, which affects the overall competitiveness of the auction.
Yeah.
So kind of building in kind of more kind of partners into the auction, and driving competition, driving density within auction, I think helps to mitigate that as a first order effect. One of the things that you can perhaps do is to restrict the frequency. Now, part of that is you're artificially increasing the CPMs because you're bringing down the frequency. But I think there is that second order signal that you're sending to networks, which I don't know how they interpret it, but you're saying we're not going to show impressions or ads as often to our users because we think that each ad opportunity should be valuable enough for us to show it to users. So to come back to your point about ad frequency, I think it becomes a control that that publishers have to be a lot more sensitive in using, and must be a lot more granular in kind of calibrating that frequency. It helps to mitigate CPMs artificially in part, but it also maybe helps to increase the kind of CPM in the mid to long term, because signals that you're sending is saying, hey, we're not going to send it unless it is a valuable enough ad that we want to show. If you think about monetization, one of the kind of levers that a monetization team now has is setting floors, and saying that, we want to play around with floors because we think that, what the floor represents is the minimum value of that user or of the kind of segment of users to us. And so we're not going to show them just any ad. We're only going to show ads that are worth 50 cents, $1, because that is what we're willing to kind of trade off if we are to show an ad at all to our players.
It's an interesting point that one of the ways to mitigate this is really with the publisher saying, you know what, Less is more.
I think that's the long and short of it, really.
So, what's your wish list when it comes to those partnerships, the gaps that you think need to be filled?
I think having that control for publishers on the ad quality and being able to manipulate that in response to what publishers are seeing players' behavior be, I think is going to be a very powerful kind of feature to build that partnership, because um it lets us kind of play around with it. It lets us find that sweet spot for those networks. And I think what's interesting about that as well is that because different networks have different USPs for their advertisers, right? That's why all these different networks exist in the first place. You're going to have naturally different demand that comes in. It might not make sense for certain publishers, but certain networks, maybe those that have a lot of brand demand, for instance, to offer very long video forms, if none of their kind of advertising partners offer that. Conversely, you might say in to that same network that because we like brand, because we know that it tends to be less offensive or kind of less in your face, versus a performance marketing, right? You should be willing to go out to your advertising partners and ask them for longer form content, because at Christmas time, for instance, no fewer people mind a long jingle, right?
True.
Versus watching yet another kind of 30-second, 60-second ad that is really asking you to download the game. So I think being able to offer different levels of granularity on the ad quality and A/B test that is a wish list for publishers, given that ad quality is a direct input into price.
Yeah.
But if we go back right to the start and we were talking, about first party data, about the signals, I think one of the things that we will see come out, I imagine, of 2025 is how first party data will start to be ingested. But I think in order for that to happen, I think networks need to come with, SSPs and networks. They need to come with some sort of idea of what they think is going to be valuable, because then publishers know these are the things that we have to prioritize, right? And of course, I think a lot of it is going to be speculative in terms of the uplift on CPMs, because it depends on what advertising demand is out there. But for us to be able to do some sort of modeling, right, or maths on how much are we actually going to get out of all of this investment is going to be kind of interesting and meaningful. None of this is to say that it's easy, because I don't know if we have any kind of like low hanging fruit available at the moment. But they are kind of worthwhile and meaningful things that we should be tackling, and which we hope will take partnerships with networks to the next stage of this evolution, right? Because it's no longer about just waterfall optimizations. What are the best prices? Where are you seeing the best yields? It's a lot of conversations that are very product kind of offering driven right now. What type of new products or services can we perhaps start to develop together in collaboration with publishers?
Because you need to know what data you need to be passing, and they need to be telling you what data is really necessary, so that you can have a model that works for both sides. Otherwise, you're going to be doing much more than you're going to be getting back in return. And you want to have some guarantee before you invest in this in the first place, is what I'm hearing here.
Absolutely, that's right.
So what about you yourself? I mean, you keep ahead of these changes. I've seen you. I'll be seeing you more in the new year as well. Are there innovations, strategies, models, tactics that have caught your attention where you're like, yes, if I do need to take, a pioneer role here, I have to be the one driving this?
I think there is a bigger role to play for edtech in 2025. What shape that takes, and what kind of edtech we choose to develop, as a publisher, as a network, as an industry, I think is going to be a focus for 2025. And I think will feature in a lot more conversations in the ecosystem. I think
Mm-hmm.
some things that are already out there, you know, if you think about kind of innovative ad formats that are out there, I think are starting to kind of take shape, but they are still quite nascent, right, relative to the
Yeah.
more kind of mainstay formats like banners and interstitials and so on. And I think that is true for kind of other things that we see there. For instance, like, you know, ID-less solutions are also quite a nascent thing that have come out in the last 2 years. Um, and it's a way around the first party data issue, right? But again, even for an ID-less solution, there is some ID. It's just not tied to a first party data. And again, the question is whether or not a network, an advertiser can decrypt whatever that ID taxonomy happens to be, right? So I think a lot of moving parts to grapple with in 2025. Pioneering role, you're being very kind, Peggy, but you know, I think hopefully to kind of kickstart a lot of the conversations that we've just mentioned.
And to your point, and I never heard anyone tell me this, but you're absolutely right. We have to think about the genre. You know, a mid-core game has a very different level of focus and concentration, and there will be maybe different ad formats that would work in a mid-core as opposed to a casual. We haven't thought that through, but
Yeah,
that could be the next opportunity as well.
and I suppose that it's often a reason I think why it's very difficult to just copy paste a
Mm-hmm.
studio's kind of playbook you know, directly into yours, right? I think those principles perhaps are ones that we will need to shape a bit more, certainly as a publisher, right? And in this new era, but you know, if you think about the ecosystem and you think about partnerships, what can networks kind of provide as levers, as inputs, as insights that help to make those principles a bit more concrete and help publishers to decide where along the spectrum of that principle do they fall. No right answers, just kind of like
No,
where
that's true.
you choose to fall.
Reasons to have conversations and hopefully conversations with you. Where will I be seeing you this year, Andrew? Where will I be? What conferences or events might you be at?
Definitely going to be at PGC
Okay,
in London.
there you go. I will be too.
Um,
We can continue it.
we'll probably make an appearance at Games Forum in Barcelona because Tripledot
Okay.
has a studio in Barcelona
Yeah.
as well, and also
Uh-huh.
an office in Barcelona, and so it's nice to pair that up with a visit to you know, meet my colleagues and the
Lovely.
team that I work with very closely. Um, but I would say that's probably planned for the first quarter of the year. I haven't thought much further than that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I will be delighted to connect with you and continue the conversation there. And I want to continue where we started at the beginning because you had me thinking the whole time. It's like, yes, you know, there's partnership, there's change, there's balance, there's changing models, understanding, getting more granular about data, and maybe getting brands in as a result because we'll be doing this right with like a player first focus and lens. So we started out with where we were and where we're going and the music you thought of that fit it. Give me something inspiring to get us to roll up our sleeves for what's ahead in 2025 because it's going to be work, but it's going to be worth it.
I think part of the fun of being in the gaming business, right, is that, and particularly now, in the landscape and the environment that we are in, is that there might not be easy wins, or there might not be kind of like big wins that can
No.
come that easily, unless, you know, another hack falls around, which I don't know if there will be, but
Mm,
there will be many small wins along the way. And I think
mhm,
as you build up a new picture of what that landscape is going to look like,
mhm,
and how you might, you know, as a publisher, gain a competitive edge
mhm,
in this new kind of world that we find ourselves in. So hopefully, I think the inspiration is that, you know, things are there for the taking,
mm.
but it is
Okay.
something that is going to be fun. It's going to be an intense challenge, and it's going to be a puzzle. And I hope people in the gaming industry like puzzles because we make a lot of puzzle
We
games.
make them, yeah.
So, so hopefully there is that satisfaction as well.
And a little bit of music inspiration here. What would fit here? You did so well at the start.
One of my favorite musicals of all time. Favorite musicals of all time, and favorite films of all time, really, is Legally Blonde. What better than to have people underestimate you and then you come out on top of Harvard Law School, nonetheless. There almost needs to be this kind of like sense of, yes, it can be solved, right? We just need to kind of continue to push through, continue to believe in ourselves, continue to be the optimist that you are, Peggy, and find a way. But Legally Blonde is such an inspirational musical. The soundtrack is brilliant. And you get to the end and you realize that kind of like there are always better things kind of out there. In fact, the ending of Groundhog Day musical as well is this kind of like beautiful story about the like ending on them watching the sunrise, watching the sun view, and being able to enjoy a new day. And I think that's a lovely way to think about it as well.
That's the way I look at it too. Now I know, Andrew, why I found you and why it resonated. Now I have to find you in real life again to continue, because what you're sharing here is what we need to be sharing. We need to be spreading this word and not the sort of the easy sort of griping PV, this is my pet peeve, this is my gripe, this is what pisses me off. That's not going to get us anywhere. That's not really constructive. So absolutely enjoyed this. Thank you so much for sharing and for joining me. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peggy. This was great fun, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course, knowledge is for sharing. That's what you've done. That's what we do. We spread the word. So yes, you tell your tribe, like the show, love the show, subscribe to the channel. All of the above would be amazing. And remember, this is a series powered by Verve. More in store in the series, so stick around. We are just getting started. We are on a roll. And of course, if you're tuning into In the Groove on YouTube, well, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. It will allow you to stay up to date with the series, and not only that, enjoy the pure gold of knowledge and insights our guests bring to every episode.